I've been interviewing a number of evangelical leaders on the issue of immigration and immigration reform, and a concern that's been raised as of late is that a number of evangelicals, particularly those who attend church more regularly, are fairly supportive of the immigrant and immigration reform, but some of those numbers have been dropping off as of late. And one reason that has been raised recently is that of the growth of the Tea Party and some of the agitation surrounding that there's been a concern by a number of those activists of the impact of immigration on this country and the Tea Party itself. A number of those activists have supported the Arizona law and so on, and evangelical involvement in and association with that movement, which is clearly not all evangelicals who are involved, but some of that clearly does seem to be having a dampening effect on evangelical support for immigration reform. These days, immigration reform is a hot topic. It's of great concern to many folks in this country, particularly those who don't have legal status. And it's of particular concern because the number of those who are undocumented in this country has been growing, and there's been a huge demographic shift in this nation. And so for some, that is cause for alarm, and some that is cause for excitement. Immigration reform is excessively complex. Obviously, that's why it has been very difficult to pass legislation thus far, and a lot of the legislation surrounding immigration has been quite piecemeal. That's the desire for something more comprehensive and logical and coherent. Evangelicals have been divided in part because there's a great concern that there's adherence to the rule of law. Simultaneously, there's a concern that we welcome the stranger and care for the vulnerable in our midst. And so evangelicals, amongst other religious folks, are very concerned that the law can do all of those things. Evangelicals have recently become more involved on the issue of immigration. In particular, the National Association of Evangelicals, which did not issue a strong resolution in support of immigration reform in the last major go-around, has now become a significant player on immigration reform as of October 2009 when they issued a resolution, and they've had a number of advocates now that are making this a priority for the organization and speaking on behalf of their members, pushing the administration and our Congress to consider humane and just immigration reform. Samuel Rodriguez of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference and others who are members of the board of the NAE have been pushing that organization to consider this more fully for quite some time. It's come about as of late because in part the NAA has been careful to ensure that they could support something that all of their leaders could agree upon. Now, that organization doesn't represent all evangelicals, but for example, the Southern Baptist Convention, which represents millions of Baptists in the United States, even earlier on in 2006 was able to pass a resolution in support of a certain form of comprehensive immigration reform. Richard Land, who heads their policy arm, was clear that he himself and they were not necessarily in support of the legislation that was being promoted at that time, but something of that nature, and is one of the evangelicals that Obama has also turned to for support on immigration reform. Others who have been coming to the fore have been some megachurch pastors. They show support for the immigrant, and they show support for mercy and justice without giving specific policy prescriptions. So Bill Hybels, for example, of Willow Creek, and his wife, Lynn Hybels, have become increasingly outspoken on the issue and are very keen on educating their members on this issue. In fact, purchasing for their membership a recent book that was written by World Relief advocacy experts, Matt Sorens and Jenny Wang. World Relief is the relief and development arm of the National Association of Evangelicals. They wrote a book called Welcoming the Stranger on immigration and immigration reform, and that book was distributed to the members of Willow Creek, huge megachurch. So obviously there is intent on educating their members, and that's just one key example. But there are a number that remain silent, and some that are in support of more restrictionist approach to immigration. I would say more than not, evangelical leaders who are not necessarily in support are going to remain silent. That's in part because they don't want to be seen as nativist or racist if they don't come out in support of immigration reform. But there are legitimate reasons why evangelicals, amongst others, may have concern, right? And some of the concerns that tend to be raised are that what happens, of course, to those in this society, citizens and other residents who are already at risk in terms of access to employment and resources and so on. Why should Christians get behind legislation that might support those who have broken the law or jumped the line, as it were? Christians who would disagree with this line of thinking in terms of the rule of law would say, well, the law is broken and is in need of remedy, that the U.S., that its economy for quite some time has been excessively reliant upon immigrant labor, documented and undocumented, without providing the necessary number of visas for those who might come to work here either seasonally or permanently, and not providing the appropriate legal channels. One thing evangelicals, again, can bring is a pressure for some breadth of components in that immigration reform. So that would include, yes, humane security measures to ensure that there is a control of the flow of immigration into this country, a path to legalization for those who are already here, not amnesty, but a means by which folks could garner legal status with some means of restitution, a guest worker program that would allow for some circularity in our migration patterns to continue a pattern that we've had for many years that does seem to have worked. Penalties for employers who continue to hire undocumented folks, but would put a greater emphasis on the employer rather than penalizing the employee. That would also include an emphasis on family reunification. That clearly is the priority for many people of faith, evangelicals amongst them. Improvement of our bureaucracy. And increasing the number of folks dedicated to working on issues of immigration so that we could reduce the backlogs, which are putting excessive burdens on folks and keeping families apart and making it very difficult for those who are trying to follow the legal channel to get here and remain here. The Tea Party, of course, is concerned about the growth of the size of our government and would like, in fact, to do the opposite of improving our bureaucracy. But I would see that as a particular concern when it comes to the role of immigration and customs enforcement and the need for growth of that organization and coherence of that outfit to be able to facilitate just immigration.